Rain poured down over Manhattan, turning the streets into glowing mirrors of neon light. Cold winds snaked between the high-rises, carrying the acrid scent of burnt coffee from a nearby food cart. Julian Cross, soaked in his Armani suit, moved briskly through the underground parking lot of the Cross and Barrett building. The Patek Philippe on his wrist read 10:47 p.m. Another long day, private meetings, million-dollar contracts, and ice-cold handshakes. But tonight, all he wanted was to go home, sip a glass of scotch, and forget the world existed. The garage was empty, save for the echo of rain from the exit ramp. His Bentley Continental sat in the far corner, glistening beneath the fluorescent lights. He pressed the key fob, and the car lights flashed. But just as his hand touched the door handle, a sharp voice rang out from the shadows. "Don't get in the car!" Julian startled, spinning around. A small figure stood a few meters away, wearing a blue janitor's jacket. Her face was obscured by a baseball cap, but her eyes burned bright, like she'd just seen a ghost. In her hand, she clutched a broom as if it were a weapon. "What?" Julian frowned, annoyance creeping into his voice. He wasn't used to being yelled at, especially not by a janitor. "The brakes," she said, her voice trembling but firm. She pointed to the concrete floor, where a trail of glistening fluid snaked from the front wheel of the Bentley. "Someone cut the brake lines. If you drive, you'll die." Julian blinked. His brain, usually wired to dissect complex legal contracts, went blank. He bent down and examined the fluid. It didn't look like standard engine oil. It was thin, clear, and had a sharp chemical odor. His heartbeat quickened. "Who are you?" he asked, standing upright, trying to keep his composure. "How do you know this?" But she didn't answer. She stepped back, eyes still wary. "Call a mechanic, check the car, don't drive it." Then, like a ghost, she turned and walked quickly toward the emergency stairwell. Her rubber soles squeaked against the wet floor. "Hey, wait!" Julian called after her, but she had already vanished behind the metal door. It slammed shut, leaving him alone with the rain and the pounding in his chest. He pulled out his phone and called building maintenance. "I need a technician in the garage, now," he said coldly. "There's an issue with my car." 15 minutes later, a technician named Mike, wearing a reflective jacket, crouched beside the Bentley, flashlight beaming under the chassis. "Jesus," Mike muttered, shaking his head. "Brake line's been cut. Clean slice, like a scalpel. If you'd driven down 57, this car would have plowed straight into traffic." A chill ran down Julian's spine. He wasn't paranoid, but this wasn't an accident. Someone had wanted him dead. And if it weren't for that woman, he would have stepped into that car, hit the gas, and possibly ended up in the ER or worse. "What's her name?" Julian asked, turning to the garage security guard, an older man named Sal standing nearby. "Who?" Sal frowned. "The woman, the janitor. She was just here. She yelled to warn me." Sal shrugged. "Probably Olivia. Olivia Reed. She works the night shift. Doesn't talk much. Bit odd if you ask me." Olivia Reed. Julian repeated the name in his mind, like it was a missing piece in a puzzle he hadn't yet started. He looked back at the Bentley, the oil trail, the stairwell door she had vanished behind. As a lawyer, he knew people didn't act without motive. What did she know? And why had she saved him? The rain kept falling, but now Julian felt it wasn't just soaking through his suit, it was stripping away something deeper. The armor he'd built around himself for years. The illusion of invincibility. You're watching Soul Stories, where every tale whispers of love, healing, and hope. If you believe that even the smallest act of kindness can change a life, and that love often arrives when we least expect it, don't forget to subscribe and be part of our journey. Now stay with us. The story is just beginning. On Tuesday morning, the Cross and Barrett office on the 47th floor of One Penn Center was bathed in golden sunlight. The glass walls mirrored the Manhattan skyline, but Julian Cross had no mind for the view. He sat behind his walnut desk, eyes fixed on his laptop screen, where the technician's report on the Bentley remained open. "Intentionally cut," it read, "not an accident." The clinical phrasing cut through his mind like a blade. Julian sipped from his porcelain mug, filled with the expensive Blue Mountain coffee his assistant Claire always had ready. But today it tasted like water. The woman named Olivia Reed, the janitor who saved his life, still haunted him. He had asked Sal, the garage security guard, to check the work schedule. Olivia worked the night shift on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. Today she wouldn't be in, and no one knew where she lived. He pushed his chair back, stood, and walked to the window. Below, traffic on 7th Avenue was as clogged as ever, car horns blaring intermittently. Who wanted him dead? And why would Olivia, a stranger, risk herself to warn him? The question circled his mind like an unsolved case. The phone rang, snapping him out of his thoughts. Claire's face appeared on the screen. Mr. Cross, Judge Waller just sent a notice. A new class action against EcoSynth. The court is requesting the full documentation from the 2020 lawsuit by Friday. Julian frowned. EcoSynth. The name stirred a vague memory. In 2020, Cross and Barrett had represented the chemical giant in a class action lawsuit in Millbridge, an industrial town 2 hours outside New York. Families there had accused EcoSynth of dumping toxic waste, causing cancer in dozens of residents. The case had wrapped up quickly, with a ruling in EcoSynth's favor. Julian had only acted as an advisor, letting David Harper, his longtime partner, lead the case. And now it was being reopened? What grounds are they reopening it on? Julian asked, his voice calm but sharp. A 7-year-old girl from Millbridge, Emma Tate. She died of leukemia last month. Her family claims to have new evidence that EcoSynth suppressed toxicity data. They've hired a legal aid team to reopen the suit. Legal aid. The words made Julian pause. He turned back to his desk, opened his laptop, and typed Olivia Reed into the firm's internal system. No results. He tried Google, adding legal aid and EcoSynth to the search. A dated news article from 2020 appeared, the headline sending a chill down his spine. Legal aid attorney convicted for fabricating evidence in EcoSynth lawsuit. He clicked the article. Olivia Reed, 29, once a rising star at legal aid, had represented the Millbridge families. She was accused of submitting a falsified scientific report, which discredited the plaintiffs. The court sentenced her to 18 months in prison, and her license to practice law was revoked. The article included a grainy photo. Olivia, hair pulled back, eyes fierce yet pained, being led out of the courtroom. Julian felt his stomach tighten. The woman who saved him last night wasn't just a janitor. She had once been a lawyer, one who had stood on the opposing side of Cross and Barrett, of David Harper, and she had lost everything in the very case that was now coming back to life. He stood, grabbed his coat, and called out, "Claire, find David Harper. I need to see him. Now." David Harper sat in the conference room, his tailored gray suit fitting him perfectly. At 52, he still had the charm of a top-tier attorney, salt and pepper hair, a confident smile, and eyes sharp as steel. But today, Julian noticed something off. David was tapping his fingers on the table, an uncharacteristic tick for a man who usually controlled every detail. "The EcoSynth case is being reopened," Julian said as he sat across from him. "Why is the court requesting the old files? And why wasn't I informed sooner?" David shrugged, his voice calm. "It's just a bunch of poor folks in Millbridge digging up an old case. They don't have anything new, Julian. A child died, they want someone to blame. We won in 2020, and we'll win again." "But the scientific report from that case," Julian said, locking eyes with him, "the one Olivia Reed submitted. She was convicted of falsifying it. If there's new evidence, the entire case could flip." David's fingers stopped. For a split second, his eyes flashed not with fear, but caution. Olivia Reed was a naive, overambitious young lawyer. She brought it on herself. "You don't need to dig into that, Julian. Focus on the new suit." Julian nodded, but in his mind, a piece clicked into place. David knew more than he let on, and Olivia Reed, wherever she was mopping floors in this city, might be the key to unlocking what really happened. Not just with EcoSynth, but with the brake fluid beneath his Bentley. After David left the room, Julian opened his laptop and looked up the number for the Innocence Project. If Olivia had been wrongly convicted, he needed to know the truth. Not just because she had saved him, but because he was starting to suspect that justice, the very thing he prided himself on defending, had been corrupted inside his own firm. The fluorescent lights in the Cross and Barrett office flickered above towering stacks of files on Julian Cross's desk. It was nearly 11 p.m., and Manhattan beyond the window was draped in darkness, its skyline twinkling like stars. "Julian," sleeves rolled up and eyes bloodshot from hours of screen time, flipped through page after page from the 2020 EcoSynth lawsuit. He no longer looked like the polished billionaire lawyer of the morning. He was a man chasing the truth, and the truth, he knew, was always buried in the smallest details. Claire, his assistant, had forwarded the full electronic archive of the old case through the firm's internal server. Hundreds of documents, emails, and scientific reports were stored on an encrypted hard drive. Julian started with the report Olivia Reed had submitted, the very document that led to her conviction for evidence tampering. It was a 47-page study asserting that EcoSynth's waste contained dioxin, a known carcinogen, at 10 times the legal safety threshold. The court had ruled it a forgery, but as Julian opened the PDF, something didn't sit right. He clicked on the file's properties. The metadata hidden data that logged timestamps and locations showed the report was last modified on March 14, 2020, just 3 days before Olivia submitted it to the court. But the IP address of that final edit didn't originate from the legal aid office in Brooklyn where Olivia had worked. It came from a server in Jersey City. Julian frowned and opened a forensic tool he had once used in financial fraud cases. The IP traced back to a low-profile tech firm, Triton Solutions, based in a rundown office building in Jersey City. Triton Solutions. The name rang a bell. Julian dug deeper, opening another file, a list of subcontractors who had worked with EcoSynth during the lawsuit. Triton appeared on the list, contracted for technical consulting during the 2020 proceedings. But what made his pulse spike was another discovery. Triton had received a $250,000 wire transfer from an offshore company in the Cayman Islands just 1 week after Olivia's conviction. That offshore firm, according to financial records Julian accessed, was linked to a bank account in Connecticut, an account registered under David Harper's ex-wife. Julian collapsed into his chair, breathing heavily. David, the man with the perfect smile, always in control, always winning. Had he hired hackers through Triton to alter the report, framing Olivia to secure a win for EcoSynth? And if so, why now, when the case was being reopened, would someone want him, Julian, dead? He thought of the brake fluid under his Bentley. The technician had confirmed it cut with a precision blade, not an accident. Julian didn't believe in coincidences. He was the only one at Cross and Barrett with full access to the old EcoSynth files, including the off-record documents David had once insisted be kept off-system. If David orchestrated Olivia's downfall, he now had every reason to fear Julian unearthing the truth. Julian picked up his phone and texted Claire, "Find everything on Triton Solutions, Jersey City, as detailed as possible. Need it by 8 a.m. Then he opened his email and began composing a message to the Innocence Project, an organization that advocated for the wrongly convicted. "I need information on Olivia Reed's 2020 case. There may be new evidence." He hesitated, then hit send. If Olivia had been framed, he didn't just owe her an apology, he owed her justice. The next morning, Julian walked into the Cross and Barrett conference room as David Harper delivered a strategy presentation on the new EcoSynth lawsuit. Around the table, ambitious young attorneys and seasoned legal veterans nodded in sync with David's polished PowerPoint slides. But Julian wasn't listening. He was watching David, how he adjusted his tie, how he avoided Julian's gaze whenever the 2020 case was mentioned. "We'll emphasize that EcoSynth complied with all environmental regulations," David said smoothly, like a man reciting a well-rehearsed script. "This lawsuit is just a desperate grab by a struggling community trying to cash in." Julian leaned forward. "What about the 2020 report, the one Olivia Reed submitted? If there's evidence it was tampered with, that changes everything." The room fell silent. David turned slowly. His smile faltered. "What are you suggesting, Julian? The court already ruled. Olivia Reed was a liar and she paid the price." "But what if she wasn't lying?" Julian asked, his voice calm but razor-sharp. "What if someone else edited the report to set her up?" David gave a dry chuckle, but Julian noticed how tightly he gripped his pen. "You've been watching too many legal dramas, Julian. Focus on the current case. EcoSynth is paying us millions to win." Julian nodded, but a plan had already begun forming in his mind. He had to find Olivia Reed not just to thank her for saving his life, but to confirm what he now suspected. If David had orchestrated her fall, and if he was willing to cut brake lines to protect his secrets, then Julian wasn't just fighting for justice anymore. He was fighting to survive. Leaving the office, Julian walked down 7th Avenue, where street vendors were hawking hot dogs and lemonade. The exhaust fumes and honking horns snapped him into focus. He stopped in front of a small cafe, a place where Sal had mentioned Olivia often stopped after her night shifts. He didn't know what she looked like, but something told him he'd recognize her. He stepped inside and looked around. The cafe was nearly empty, just one employee wiping down tables. But in the far corner, a petite woman in a gray hoodie sat reading a book. Her hair was tied up, and her eyes sharp, guarded told Julian instantly. It was her, Olivia Reed. "Olivia," he said, stepping closer. She looked up, her expression cold as ice. "We need to talk," Julian said. "About EcoSynth, and about what happened to you." She closed her book without a word. But Julian knew, from this moment forward, there was no turning back. The cafe on 7th Avenue carried the comforting scent of roasted chestnuts and toasted bread. But the air between Julian Cross and Olivia Reed was colder than a courtroom. Olivia sat across from him, hands clasped tightly over a paperback copy of Just Mercy by Brian Stevenson. Her gaze was sharp, but Julian recognized a hidden wound in her eyes, one no court ruling could ever mend. He slid a cappuccino toward her, but she didn't touch it. "You saved my life," Julian began, his voice low but sincere, "and I think I know why you lost everything." Olivia raised an eyebrow but stayed silent, studying him like a lawyer assessing opposing counsel. Julian reached into his leather briefcase and placed a thin folder on the table. "This is the metadata from the scientific report you submitted in the 2020 EcoSynth case. It was edited from a server in Jersey City, not Legal Aid's office. That server belongs to Triton Solutions, a company paid through an offshore account tied to David Harper's ex-wife." She blinked for the first time, a flicker of shock, but then her jaw tightened, her voice cold. "You think I haven't tried to prove my innocence? I filed appeals, hired IT experts, even begged the Innocence Project. But no one listens to a broke lawyer going up against Cross and Barrett. So why are you here, Cross? To ease your guilt?" Julian flinched as if slapped. He looked down, inhaled deeply. "I didn't know the full truth back then. I was just an advisor, not directly involved with EcoSynth. But now I know you were framed, and I want to make it right." "Make it right?" Olivia let out a bitter laugh, sharp as broken glass. "I lost my reputation, my freedom, my career. I wanted to be a prosecutor, Cross. Now I mop floors in your building, while lawyers like you joke about million-dollar lawsuits. How do you make that right? With a check?" Julian didn't respond immediately. He looked at her, the woman who once stood in court with fierce conviction, now wearing an old hoodie to hide her past. "I can't give you back the years you lost," he said, "but I can help you get justice. And I need your help." She narrowed her eyes. "Help you? With what?" "The Stonewell case," Julian said, lowering his voice. "A steel plant in Queens. They're being sued for exploiting immigrant workers and covering up workplace injuries. I'm leading the case, but I need an off-the-record advisor, someone who understands the law and the people the system forgets. Someone like you." She studied him, her gaze wavering between suspicion and curiosity. "Why should I trust you? You're Cross and Barrett. You represent guys like Stonewell, like EcoSynth. Because I'm not even sure who I represent anymore," Julian admitted. "And because if David Harper framed you, he might be behind the brake line incident too. We have a common enemy, Olivia." She was quiet for a moment, fingertips brushing the book cover. Then she stood, picked up the folder he had given her. "I'll read it, but don't expect forgiveness. I'm not doing this for you. I'm doing it for people like those Stonewell workers, the ones no one listens to." Julian nodded, feeling like he'd just passed the opening round of a trial. "Call me when you're ready. My number's in the file." She didn't reply. She just turned and walked out of the cafe. Through the window, Julian watched her disappear into the sidewalk crowd, small but defiant, like a flame refusing to go out. 2 days later, Olivia appeared in Julian's makeshift office on the 30th floor, a room he used for cases that didn't go through official firm channels. She wore a simple wool coat, but her eyes were sharp as a lawyer entering court. "I'll do it," she said, placing the Stonewall file on his desk. "But on two conditions. I remain anonymous, and you tell no one, not even David Harper." "Agreed," Julian replied without hesitation. He slid a folder across to her. "This is Stonewall's internal report. They reported 5 workplace injuries last year, but I suspect the real number is much higher." Olivia opened the file and skimmed through it with a speed that stunned Julian. Within 10 minutes, she identified 3 anomalies. All injury reports were written by the same manager, the timestamps were suspiciously uniform, and none included worker testimony. "They're covering it up," she said firmly. "Request the shift logs from the plant. If there were night shifts that didn't report injuries, that's where they buried them." Julian blinked, unable to hide his admiration. "You work faster than any associate I've ever had." "I was a lawyer," Olivia said, her voice edged with bitterness, "and I don't have time to waste." At the end of the day, Julian sat alone in his office, reading an email from Claire. Triton Solutions had shut down in 2021, but she'd tracked down a former employee, a freelance hacker named Marcus Lee, currently living in Brooklyn. Julian texted Marcus, requesting a meeting. If Marcus had knowledge about the altered EcoSynth report, it could be the evidence he needed against David. But as he shut down his laptop, a chilling thought struck him. If David had been willing to destroy Olivia, had even cut his brake lines, then Olivia, now working to expose the truth, might be next. He picked up his phone and texted her, "Be careful, don't go out alone at night." The message sent, but no reply came. Julian stared out at the lights of Manhattan. Somewhere in that city, Olivia Reed was facing the shadows of her past. And he knew, if he wanted to protect her, he'd have to outrun David Harper and the system that once crushed her. Still following the story? If this story found you outside of Soul Stories, we invite you home to where every touching tale begins with truth, hope, and heart. The makeshift office on the 30th floor of Cross and Barrett looked more like a bunker than a law firm workspace. Piles of documents cluttered the old wooden desk. A whiteboard was filled with scribbled notes, and a rattling coffee machine groaned in the corner. Julian Cross, sleeves rolled up in a blue shirt, stood at the board mapping out connections in the Stonewall case. But his mind wasn't entirely in the room. He kept glancing at Olivia Reed, seated at the edge of the desk, eyes locked on a thick stack of files. Dressed in a plain black sweater, her hair tied back, Olivia flipped through pages with lightning speed, her red ink annotations sharp and methodical. To Julian, it felt less like watching a janitor and more like witnessing a top-tier attorney in full courtroom mode. They had been working together for 3 days, and Julian remained astonished by her talent. Olivia analyzed Stonewall's financial reports faster than any associate he'd ever known, quickly spotting irregular payments disguising hush money for injured workers. Just yesterday, she had recovered a deleted internal email in which the plant manager admitted knowing about the workplace accidents, but was instructed to handle them quietly. Somehow she had restored the message from a backup file the firm's own IT team had missed. "Learned a few tricks in prison," she had said with dry sarcasm, like never trusting the system again. Today, Olivia was focused on the employee roster. She circled a name, Javier Morales, a welder from Guatemala who suffered severe injuries in an equipment explosion last year. The official record claimed it was a result of personal negligence, but Olivia wasn't buying it. "Look at this," she said, sliding the document toward Julian. "Morales had third-degree burns, but Stonewall only paid him $5,000 in compensation. A company their size doesn't lowball like that unless they want him to stay quiet." Julian nodded, jotting notes. "We need Morales' testimony. If he confirms they forced him to sign a non-disclosure agreement, we can push the court to expand the investigation." Olivia nodded, but her gaze drifted. "He won't talk easily. He's undocumented. Stonewall could threaten him with deportation. I used to represent people like him. They fear the system more than death." Julian watched her, the weight of her words sinking in. Olivia didn't just read files, she understood the people behind them. And for the first time in his career, Julian realized he rarely thought about people like Morales. He fought for contracts, money, prestige. Olivia fought for the invisible. "You're incredibly good at this," he said. without hiding his admiration. Legal aid lost a star when they let you go. Olivia stopped writing, her eyes instantly colder. Don't flatter me, Cross. I'm not here for praise. I'm here because people like Morales don't deserve to be crushed. Julian nodded, realizing he crossed a line. He changed the subject. Any updates on EcoSynth? She pulled a small USB from her bag and plugged it into his laptop. My friend Anna Torres, environmental scientist, sent this morning. Internal documents from EcoSynth, leaked by a disgruntled employee. It lists secret meetings between EcoSynth's leadership and a Cross and Barrett attorney in 2021, right after I was sentenced. Julian furrowed his brow and opened the file. A list of meetings appeared, and David Harper's name showed up 3 times. One scanned handwritten note stood out. Harper requested an increased payment to ensure the dioxin report remains buried. Julian felt his pulse spike. This wasn't just proof that David had been involved in framing Olivia. He'd continued to cover it up even after she was sent to prison. Where did Anna get this? Julian asked, tension creeping into his voice. From a former EcoSynth engineer. He works for the EPA now, Olivia replied. He wants to come clean but fears retaliation. Anna convinced him to hand it over anonymously. Julian nodded, but inside a storm was brewing. David wasn't just a greedy lawyer, he was someone willing to destroy lives to protect his clients and himself. And now that Olivia was digging, she might be in danger again. That afternoon, Julian and Olivia met Marcus Lee, a hacker who had once worked for Triton Solutions, at a dim bar in Brooklyn. Marcus, a skinny man with dyed blue hair, sat in the corner nursing a beer. I don't want trouble, he said the moment they sat down. Triton's gone. I'm out of that game. We're not here to cause trouble, Julian said, sliding an envelope containing $2,000 across the table. We just need information. In 2020, Triton altered a scientific report for EcoSynth. Who hired you? Marcus eyed the envelope, then looked at Olivia. Recognition flickered in his eyes. You're the one who got convicted, right? Reed? Olivia nodded, unwavering. Tell us, Marcus. Who was behind it? Marcus exhaled, his voice dropping. I didn't do the job myself, but I heard things. Some guy from Cross and Barrett Harper paid my boss $50,000 to alter the dioxin report. They used a Jersey City server to cover their tracks. My boss said it was the easiest job we ever had. Julian clenched his fists beneath the table. She lost everything because of that, he said, voice low and sharp. Is there anything else? Marcus shrugged. Just that Harper wasn't working alone. A guy from EcoSynth was involved too, Kessler, their COO. He signed off on the payment. Olivia wrote down the name, her hand trembling slightly. Julian saw it. This wasn't just about justice. This was how she reclaimed herself. He rested a hand gently on her shoulder. We'll find Kessler, he said, and he'll have to answer for it. That evening, Julian took Olivia to a small Italian restaurant in West Village, hoping to offer her a rare moment of calm. The soft glow of candlelight and the scent of oregano created a bubble of warmth. Over carbonara and Chianti, Olivia finally relaxed just a little. You've never mentioned your family, Julian said as he poured her a glass of wine. Where are they? Olivia stared into her glass, her voice distant. My mom died when I was 20. Lung cancer. She worked at a textile plant near Millbridge, breathed in fumes from factories like EcoSynth. My dad left when I was a kid. It was just me and her. She taught me justice doesn't come, it's fought for. Julian sat silently, sensing the vast chasm between them. He grew up in a Greenwich mansion, raised by billionaire parents. He had never known loss like hers. I'm sorry, he said, voice thick. I never thought about people like your mother when I took on cases like EcoSynth. Olivia shrugged, but her eyes softened. You're not the only one. The system's built to protect people like EcoSynth, not people like my mom. That's why I became a lawyer, and why I can't stop even if Harper or anyone else wants me silenced. Julian raised his glass, gently touching hers. To justice, he said, and to you, Olivia. You deserve to take back everything. She smiled a small, sincere smile. Just do your part, Cross. I don't need promises. By the time they left the restaurant, the city was bathed in light, but Julian felt a chill in the air. Olivia walked beside him, her thin coat no match for the wind. She was a buried genius, unearthed but still vulnerable to men like David. Julian pulled out his phone and texted Claire, "Run full background on EcoSynth COO Kessler, everything." Then he turned to Olivia. "You should stay somewhere safe tonight. I have an apartment in Midtown. Security 24/7, just until we know what David's planning." Olivia shook her head. "I don't need protecting, Cross. I've survived worse." But just as they passed a narrow alley, a black car crept by, headlights sweeping over them. Julian grabbed Olivia's hand and pulled her into the shadows. "Don't argue," he whispered. "Just this once, trust me." She nodded, her eyes alert. And in that moment, Julian knew he wasn't just protecting a colleague. He was protecting the one woman who could change everything for him, for the case, and for the justice he once thought he understood. Rain tapped against the window of the 30th floor office like a somber metronome, the perfect backdrop to the tension thickening the air. Julian Cross stood before the whiteboard, circling the name Kessler EcoSynth with a cold, precise glare. Olivia Reed sat at the desk, flipping through the latest documents from Janitora's, her fingers moving with the focus of a lawyer preparing for the trial of a lifetime. It was 1 a.m., but neither had any intention of stopping. Every new lead came with the chilling sense that someone was watching them. Julian had just received an email from Marcus Lee, the Brooklyn-based hacker. Marcus confirmed that Kessler, EcoSynth's COO, had personally contacted Triton Solutions to handle the dioxin report back in 2020. But Marcus refused to meet again. His message was short and final. "Too dangerous. Don't contact me again." Julian understood. If David Harper had been willing to cut his brake lines, someone like Marcus would be disposable. "Find anything in Anna's files?" Julian asked, turning to Olivia. She pushed a sheet of paper toward him, a scanned copy of an internal EcoSynth meeting memo. "April 15th, 2021, she said firmly. "Kessler and Harper met to discuss making sure the dioxin report never resurfaced. There's mention of a $1.2 million payment routed through a shell company in Bermuda. Anna's trying to trace the recipient account." Julian clenched the marker in his hand, blood boiling. "David didn't just destroy your career, he kept covering up EcoSynth's crimes, even after you were imprisoned. He turned justice into a transaction." Olivia nodded, but her eyes held more pain than anger. "EcoSynth isn't just a corporation," she murmured. "They're killers who never have to pull a trigger. My mother worked near Millbridge, breathing in the toxins from factories like theirs. She died of lung cancer. No one was held accountable. I didn't take on EcoSynth for publicity. I did it for her." Julian watched her, feeling the weight behind her stoic expression. He wanted to say something comforting, but instead he just nodded. "We'll expose them," he said. "Not just for you, but for every mother like hers." She said nothing, just kept writing, but Julian saw it a flicker in her eyes. Not hope, resolve. The next morning, Julian arrived at the main Cross and Barrett office only to find his keycard disabled. Claire, his assistant, rushed into the hallway, pale-faced. "Someone broke into your office last night," she whispered. "They took your hard drive and rifled through everything. David told the partners you might have leaked confidential files." A wave of fury surged through Julian. David was playing a dirty game. Without hesitation, Julian stormed into the boardroom, ignoring the wary stares. David sat at the head of the table in a pristine gray suit, wearing his usual smug grin. "Julian," he said smoothly, "perfect timing. We were just discussing your loose handling of the EcoSynth files." "Cut the act, David," Julian snapped, voice like a blade. "Someone broke into my office. Someone tampered with my car, and we both know none of that was random." The room fell silent. The partners exchanged uncertain glances, but David only gave a dry chuckle. "You sound tired, Julian. Take some time off. We'll handle EcoSynth from here." Julian walked out, jaw tight. David wasn't just pushing him out of the case, he was erasing him. And if he was willing to target Julian, then Olivia was next. That afternoon, Julian received an anonymous message. "Stop now, or she pays the price." No name, no number. But Julian could feel David's fingerprints all over it. He called Olivia immediately, heart racing. "Where are you? Has anyone followed you?" "I'm at home," she replied, voice calm but wary. "My apartment in Harlem. Everything seems normal. Don't open the door for anyone. I'm coming now. 30 minutes later, Julian arrived at the red brick apartment complex in Harlem where Olivia lived. Her home was modest, a one-bedroom unit with a threadbare couch, a bookshelf crammed with legal texts, and a framed photo of her mother on the table. The woman's gentle smile mirrored Olivia's when she let her guard down. Julian noticed a small security camera tucked in the corner, oddly advanced for someone in her financial position. I installed it after prison, Olivia said, catching his glance. I learned not to trust anyone. Julian showed her the threatening message. David knows we're digging, Olivia. You're not safe here. She crossed her arms, defiant. I've survived worse, Cross. I don't need saving. But when she checked her security app, her face went pale. The camera at Cross and Barrett's break room. It was disabled last night. Someone knows I'm working with you? Julian stepped closer, laying a hand on her shoulder. Come to my place, Midtown Penthouse, armed security, just until we know what David's planning. She hesitated, eyes narrowing. I don't want to depend on you. Just a few days, he said. Think of me as a colleague, not a savior. After a moment, she sighed and packed a small backpack. Fine, but I'm paying rent. That night, Olivia stepped into Julian's Midtown penthouse, eyes scanning the modern abstract art and sweeping views of Central Park. This is what you call home, she said, smirking. I clean places like this. I don't live in them. Julian chuckled, handing her a glass of water. I used to think all this mattered. Now I know it's just a facade. They sat on the couch, golden lamplight softening the mood. Olivia shared stories from prison, how she learned to read people's eyes to survive, how she drafted her own appeals on scraps of paper. Julian, in turn, spoke of his father, a ruthless magnate who had drilled into him that winning was the only virtue that mattered. For the first time, they weren't just allies. They were two wounded souls seeing each other's scars. You know, Julian said quietly, when you saved me in that garage, you didn't just save my life. You made me realize how many people I've ignored, people like your mother, like the Stonewall workers. Olivia's eyes softened. You don't need to be a hero, Cross. Just stand on the right side once. When she retreated to sleep on the pull-out sofa, Julian sat alone, gazing at the glowing skyline of Manhattan. David Harper was a more dangerous threat than he'd ever imagined, but now Julian wasn't just fighting for truth. He was fighting for Olivia, the woman who had made him believe justice was worth risking everything. Moonlight filtered through the penthouse windows, casting silver streaks across the walnut floors. It was 2 a.m., but Julian Cross and Olivia Reed were still seated at the dining table, surrounded by cold coffee and scattered documents. On Julian's laptop, a new email from Anna Torres blinked open. Track the $1.2 million. The Bermuda account leads to an EcoSynth subsidiary, but we need the original contract to prove Harper accepted the bribe. Olivia circled a line in the EcoSynth meeting minutes. Contract archived at Storage 17B HQ. Storage 17B, Julian repeated, voice low. If we find that contract, we can prove David took a payoff to frame you and bury EcoSynth's crimes. Olivia nodded, but her eyes were heavy, not just from lack of sleep, but from years of fighting a system designed to crush her. Julian stood and poured her a glass of water, placing it in front of her. You don't have to do this alone anymore, Olivia. I'm here. She took the glass but didn't drink. I've always been alone, Cross, in prison, in court, scrubbing the floors of your building. I'm not used to leaning on anyone. Julian sat across from her, gaze steady. I used to believe the system was justice. I wore expensive suits, signed million-dollar contracts, and thought I was doing good. But that system abandoned you. It turned a future prosecutor into a janitor. I can't undo the past, but I can stand beside you now. Olivia looked at him, and for the first time, Julian saw her eyes glisten. She turned away, voice trembling. I used to stare into a mirror in prison and tell myself I wouldn't break, but every day I felt myself fading. David Harper didn't just take my career. He took my belief that justice was real. Julian reached across the table, gently touching her hand. He didn't win, Olivia. You're still here, still fighting, and I won't let you fight alone. She took a deep breath, wiping away a tear. All right, she said, voice steady again. We find that contract, But if David finds out, he won't just come after you, he'll come after me and Anna too. Julian nodded. Every step brings more risk. Storage 17B is at EcoSynth HQ in Newark. I'll contact someone there to request access under the pretense of legal review. You prepare questions for Kessler, just in case we cross paths. Olivia opened her laptop. I'll ask Anna to dig deeper security schedules, camera placement. If David makes a move, we need to be ahead of him. The next morning, Julian drove to Cross and Barrett, only to find his badge denied access. Inside, colleagues avoided eye contact, and Claire whispered to him that David had convinced the board to suspend his access, citing potential data breach. Julian wasn't surprised. David was building a wall of lies, and every brick had his fingerprints. Back at the penthouse, Olivia was reviewing blueprints of Storage 17B. There's 24/7 surveillance, she said, but at 3 a.m., there's only one guard during the shift change. That's our window. Julian nodded just as his phone vibrated. Another anonymous message. Walk away from 17B or she dies. He handed Olivia the phone, jaw tight. David's panicking. He knows we're closing in. Olivia stared at the message, her hands tightening into fists. He thinks I'm scared. I've already lost everything once. He has nothing left to take. Julian looked at her at the fire in her eyes. The one that had survived prison, humiliation, and injustice. Then we do this, but carefully. I'll hire a private security team for you and Anna. No, Olivia cut in. I can protect myself. Just get me to 17B. That night in the warm light of the penthouse, they sat amid paperwork and digital maps. Olivia told Julian more about her mother, how she used to hum folk songs while working, how she taught Olivia that even the smallest voice could change the world. Julian opened up about his father, how he became a lawyer to live up to impossible expectations, not out of passion or principle. I never thought I could walk away from all of it, he admitted, but working with you, I'm starting to understand why you never did. Olivia's gaze softened. You don't have to walk away from everything, Cross. Just stand on the right side. They mapped the plan. Julian would request legal access to 17B as EcoSynth's legal counsel, while Olivia posed as a legal aid. Anna would monitor the security system remotely using a program she acquired through a contact at the EPA. If everything worked, they'd retrieve the bribery contract proof to take down David once and for all. Later, as Olivia slept in the guest room, Julian sat alone by the window, watching the glow of Manhattan. He thought of the threats, the disabled cameras, the cut brake lines. David Harper wasn't just corrupt, he was dangerous. But Julian wasn't the man he once was, either. He had found something worth fighting for, not just justice, but Olivia, the woman who had pulled him from his comfortable numbness and forced him to remember that mistakes don't define a life. He picked up his phone and texted Claire, I need everything you can find on Storage 17B, EcoSynth HQ, urgent. Then he glanced toward the living room, where Olivia slept peacefully for the first time in nights. She was a buried genius forgotten, dismissed, but she had saved him. Not just from a sabotage car, from himself. EcoSynth's headquarters in the outskirts of Newark loomed like a cold concrete monolith, wrapped in barbed wire fences and bristling with security cameras. At 3 a.m., under a moonless sky, Julian Cross and Olivia Reed stepped out of a rented SUV, posing as Cross and Barrett's legal audit team. Julian wore a tailored suit and carried a sleek briefcase. Olivia, in a baseball cap and a gray coat, held a clipboard like any junior legal assistant. Their hearts pounded not just from the bitter winter chill, but from the knowledge that Storage 17B held either the final key to the truth or a deadly trap. From her remote terminal, Anna Torres whispered through their earpieces. I've disabled the cameras for 15 minutes. Shift change just happened. Only one guard at the west gate. Move now. Julian nodded and led Olivia through the side entrance, where a blinking electronic lock waited. Olivia, with skills honed during prison and survival, used a small device Anna had provided. The lock clicked. They stepped into Storage 17B, a maze of steel shelves, old paper, and dust-heavy air. 12 minutes, Olivia muttered, sharp and focused. She scanned the shelf labels for financial contracts, Q2 2021. Julian followed close, flashlight beam cutting across the shadows. The weight of risk pressed on him, David, yes, but also the very system he'd once served. If they failed, his career would implode. And Olivia, she might lose everything again. 5 tense minutes passed before Olivia stopped at a box labeled Project Funding, Q2 2021. She popped it open, flipped through thick files, and whispered, "This is it." She pulled out a stack of papers stamped confidential, a contract between EcoSynth and a Bermuda shell company signed by Kessler and David Harper, confirming a $1.2 million payment to ensure scientific reports are not utilized in future litigation. Julian's pulse surged as he read it. "We've got him. Proof David sold justice." But before they could move, the overhead lights snapped on. A cold voice echoed from the door. "I told you to walk away, Julian." David Harper stood there in a black overcoat, flanked by a large man with a gun. "Hand over the contract and maybe she walks out alive." Olivia gripped Julian's hand, but her gaze was unshaken. "You've lost, Harper. Anna sent a copy of the contract to the FBI before we even stepped inside. They're on their way." David's chuckle was dry, but his eyes wavered. "You really think the FBI will trust a convicted felon?" Julian stepped forward, shielding Olivia. "They'll trust metadata from Triton, the wire transfer records, Marcus Lee's statement, and now this contract. It's over, David." From outside, the wail of sirens pierced the silence. The man with the gun hesitated, stepping back. David swore and bolted, but the FBI had already surrounded the perimeter. Within minutes, he was in handcuffs, eyes burning with fury as agents led him past Julian and Olivia. The next morning, Cross and Barrett felt like a war zone. Julian was summoned into a boardroom filled with stony faces and silent judgment. "You've disgraced the firm," one partner said. "David Harper is facing 4 federal charges: fraud, bribery, obstruction of justice, and attempted murder. Do you honestly think we can keep you on after this?" Julian stood tall, voice calm. "I didn't disgrace the firm. I exposed a criminal. If you want to fire me for doing the right thing, do it. But I won't apologize." They did. By noon, Julian's partner title was revoked, his access revoked, his office sealed. But as he exited the building, he didn't feel defeated. He felt free. Elsewhere, Olivia sat in the modest office of the Innocence Project in Brooklyn, across from attorney Sarah Nguyen. Sarah flipped through the evidence Julian and Olivia had compiled: the bribery contract, metadata from Triton, financial transactions, testimonies from Marcus and Anna, and a new expert report showing EcoSynth's toxins. "This is a strong case," Sarah said. "We'll file to vacate your 2020 conviction. Based on this, the Bar Association could reinstate your license in a matter of months." Olivia nodded, but emotions swelled inside her. She remembered the prison nights when she wrote appeals with a pencil on scrap paper. The hours scrubbing Cross and Barrett's floors, overhearing lawyers laugh about cases she once dreamed of arguing, and now she was on the verge of reclaiming it all. "Thank you," she whispered hoarsely. "But I didn't do it alone. Julian Cross risked everything to help me." Sarah smiled. "He sounds like a rare kind of man. You're lucky to have him." Olivia didn't reply, but as she left the office, she texted Julian. "Innocence Project took the case. Thank you, Cross. Meet me at Central Park. Male aindu mani." That afternoon, Julian stood beneath a canopy of trees in Central Park, breath visible in the crisp air. Olivia approached in a wool coat, her face glowing with a quiet triumph. "They're restoring my license," she said, voice rich with pride. "And David will stand trial. You did it, Cross." "We did it," Julian corrected, smiling. "But I'm no longer a partner at Cross and Barrett. They kicked me out this morning." She frowned. "You lost everything for this? Do you regret it?" Julian looked at her, his gaze unwavering. "I lost a job, but I found something better, a reason to believe in justice. And I found you, Olivia." She smiled softly, for once without sarcasm. "Not bad, Cross, but don't think I'll let you pay for coffee." They walked side by side into the sunset, Manhattan glowing around them. Julian knew the fight wasn't over. EcoSynth still faced its reckoning, and David wouldn't go down quietly. But for the first time, he knew he was on the right path. And Olivia, the woman who had once shouted to save his life in the dark, was now the light leading the way. You're watching Soul Stories exclusive to our channel. If you're still with us, drop a comment. We read and cherish them all. Subscribe to support more heartfelt, original stories. Thanks for being part of the Soul Stories family. The April sun cast a golden glow over the steps of the federal courthouse in Lower Manhattan, lighting up the raindrops still clinging to the marble from that morning's drizzle. Inside courtroom 12, the final verdict had just been delivered, leaving the chamber in stunned silence. EcoSynth was found guilty in the class action lawsuit filed by the families of Millbridge. The company was ordered to pay $500 million in damages for the lives their toxic waste had stolen, including that of 7-year-old Emma Tate, who died of leukemia. Judge Waller's voice rang solemn and clear. The undeniable evidence of EcoSynth's concealment of toxicity data, along with the complicity of certain legal professionals, has exposed an injustice far too long buried beneath red tape and silence. Julian Cross stood in the back of the courtroom, wearing a modest gray suit, no longer bearing the title of partner at Cross & Barrett. He watched as the Millbridge families embraced one another, weeping with relief and bittersweet victory. A tightness in his chest released, as though a weight he'd carried for years had finally been lifted. But his eyes drifted from the verdict to the doorway, where Olivia Reed stood, clad in a navy blue blazer, her gaze steady but tinged with the quiet ache of long-fought battles. The trial had spanned 3 grueling months. Julian and Olivia worked side by side with the legal aid team, Olivia operating as an anonymous advisor while her license awaited restoration. Despite that, she analyzed documents, drafted strategy notes, and helped frame witness questions so precisely that even seasoned attorneys took notice. Julian, though no longer officially tied to a firm, leveraged every ounce of his legal acumen and network to ensure that every piece of evidence from Harper's bribery contract to the original dioxin report was heard. Today, justice had won, but the cost had been real. Outside, reporters swarmed the courthouse steps, cameras flashing and microphones aimed at the Millbridge families. Julian and Olivia stood beneath the shade of an old elm tree nearby, where the noise of Manhattan seemed to dim. The breeze carried the scent of streetcar coffee, and Julian found himself remembering their first conversation outside that cafe on 7th Avenue, when Olivia had stared him down with fire in her eyes and refused to be ignored. "You did it, Olivia," he said, his voice low but full of warmth. "This verdict, it's not just for Emma Tate or the people of Millbridge. It's for your mother, for everyone EcoSynth stole a future from." Olivia looked at him, her eyes flickering with emotion. "We did it," she corrected, voice hoarse. "If you hadn't stood up to Harper, if you hadn't risked everything, I'd still be mopping the floors of your building." Julian offered a quiet smile. "I didn't risk as much as you. I lost a job. You lost a dream. But you got back up, Olivia. You're stronger than anyone I've ever known." She turned away, eyes focused on the steps where families were giving interviews. "I'm not strong," she whispered. "There were nights I didn't think I'd survive. I wrote letters to my mother in prison, even though I knew she'd never read them. I apologized for failing. But today, I think she's smiling." Julian stepped closer, gently taking her hand. Her fingers were cold, but she didn't pull away. "You didn't fail," he said. "You changed lives. You changed mine." Olivia looked up at him, her expression both gentle and fierce. "We were both wrong, Julian. You thought justice was about money. I thought the system would protect the innocent. But this time, we chose right." Julian squeezed her hand, a pulse of something new between them. "I didn't believe you when I had the chance," he murmured. "But I'm not letting you go now." She smiled, for real this time, a smile that held no sarcasm, no guardedness. "Don't get ahead of yourself, Cross," she teased. "I still haven't forgiven you for that terrible cappuccino on our first meeting." They both laughed, and in that moment, beneath the sunlight and rustling leaves, the city seemed to pause. The fight wasn't over. David Harper still awaited trial, and EcoSynth's verdict might face appeals, but for the first time, Julian felt no fear of what came next. He had Olivia beside him, not just as a colleague, but as the woman who had pulled him from the shadows of his old life and into the light of something real. That evening, Julian and Olivia sat in a cozy bar tucked away in Greenwich Village. Warm yellow light flickered against exposed brick. A jazz trio played soft saxophone, filling the room with a kind of peace they hadn't known in years. They clinked their glasses of red wine. "To Millbridge," Julian said. "To Truth," Olivia added, her eyes bright. She told him her next steps, how once her license was officially restored, she planned to open a small legal practice dedicated to defending underrepresented workers and victims of corporate abuse. Julian shared his vision of starting a legal aid foundation named after Olivia's mother. "She deserves to be remembered," he said. Olivia nodded, eyes distant with memory. "I used to think justice was a destination," she said. "But now I know it's a journey, and I'm glad you walked part of it with me." Julian leaned in, his heart pounding. "I want to walk all of it with you, Olivia. Not because I'm brave, but because you make me want to be better." She didn't respond right away. She took a sip of her wine, thoughtful, but the soft curve of her lips said enough. She smiled, quiet and certain. They sat there, two people no longer defined by what they'd lost, but by what they'd chosen to fight for. And though tomorrow might bring new battles, tonight they had won. Not just against EcoSynth, but against the darkness that once lived inside them. The ballroom of the Plaza Hotel in Manhattan glittered with crystal chandeliers, their light reflecting off champagne glasses and sparkling gowns. The gala for the launch of the Reed and Cross Foundation for Justice had drawn hundreds of guest lawyers, activists, and families from Millbridge, those who once had their health and hopes stolen by EcoSynth. On stage, a large banner read, "For Justice, for the future." But the true center of attention wasn't the grandeur or luxury. It was Olivia Reed, standing at the microphone in a deep sapphire gown, her eyes burning with a flame that never dimmed. Julian Cross sat in the front row, dressed in a black tuxedo. He was no longer the powerful billionaire of Cross and Barrett, but he had never felt prouder. He watched Olivia, the woman who once saved his life in an underground garage, who used to mop the floors of his building, and who now stood as a beacon of hope for hundreds in the room. 6 months had passed since the EcoSynth ruling. In that time, Olivia had regained her license to practice law, opened a modest office in Brooklyn, and co-founded the foundation with Julian to support those abandoned by the legal system. To him, this wasn't just a fundraiser. It was proof that justice, though delayed, could still prevail. Olivia took a deep breath and her voice rang out clear and resolute. "I used to mop the floors of the same building where I once stood to argue in court," she began. The room fell silent. "I was labeled a liar. I lost my dream of becoming a lawyer. There were nights I didn't think I'd ever get back up. But the truth cannot stay buried if we refuse to abandon it." She paused, her eyes sweeping the room before settling briefly on Julian. "I didn't do this alone. The families of Millbridge fought for their children. Friends like Janitor risked everything to uncover the truth. And one man, once my adversary, chose to stand on the right side. Justice is not a destination, it's a journey, and we walk it together." The room erupted in applause. Julian felt his chest tighten, not from pride, but from the knowing that Olivia was speaking for all of them, for the ones who had once fallen, lost faith, and found their way back. He clapped, eyes locked on the woman who had transformed his life. Later, during the cocktail hour, families from Millbridge mingled with donors, their modest attire blending with elegant gowns and tuxedos. Julian found Olivia near a window, looking out at the glowing skyline of Manhattan. She held a glass of water, not champagne, and the smile on her lips carried a hint of quiet reflection. "That was an incredible speech," Julian said as he approached. "You made the whole room want to stand up and fight." Olivia turned to him, smiling faintly. "I only spoke the truth, Cross. And this time, no one could accuse me of forgery." He stood beside her, shoulder to shoulder, both gazing out at the city. "You know," he said quietly, "I used to think I had everything, money, power, prestige. But when you shouted at me in that garage, you didn't just save me from that car. You saved me from myself." Olivia looked at him, her eyes soft but steady. "You didn't need me to save you, Julian. You made your own choice, and I'm glad you did." Julian took her hand, feeling the warmth of her fingers. "I'm no longer a billionaire, Olivia. No more office on the 47th floor. No Bentley. But if you'll have me, I want to walk this road with you, not because I'm strong, but because you make me want to be better every day." She smiled for the first time without any walls. "You sure about that, Cross? I'm a broke lawyer from Brooklyn. I'm not exactly easy to live with." He chuckled, pulling her a little closer. "I'm sure, and I bet you'll win every argument we ever have." They stood there amid the soft music and golden light, knowing the future wouldn't be easy. David Harper had pled guilty in a deal with prosecutors and was sentenced to 12 years in prison for fraud, bribery, obstruction of justice, and attempted murder. EcoSynth faced a wave of new lawsuits, and their foundation was only the beginning of a long fight. But Julian and Olivia weren't afraid. They had faced the darkness and won. As the gala ended, they stepped outside into the night air. The sky above Manhattan shimmered, and the breeze carried the scent of rain and city smoke. Olivia tilted her head, looking at him. "Thank you, Julian," she said softly, sincerely, "for believing in me when no one else did." "Thank you," he replied, "for giving me a chance to make things right." They held hands as they walked down the avenue, the city lights illuminating the path ahead. Olivia Reed, once a janitor, was now a flame of justice. Julian Cross, once a billionaire, was now the man she chose not for his power, but for his courage to change. And somewhere in the light of Manhattan, their message echoed, "Don't get in the car, don't stay silent, and never believe a person who was once wrong can't be right again."